Welcome back. All right, a topic I want to talk about today that is not wrestling, not necessarily entertainment related, but it is definitely related to news north of the border. So, Canada Post, which is a crown corporation, meaning it's government supported and all that, has been losing money for a long time. And there's been full transparency about them losing a ton. Now, what's happened is that Canada Post still uses a very outdated model. So they're open for very limited hours and they don't work on weekends. And obviously, there's courier services that have competitive pricing with Canada Post and they work on weekends and they work evenings. And so Canada Post wants to modernize. Meanwhile, Canada Post workers want what they feel is a fair salary and all of that. And I'm not going to say anything negative about the union here, except for one problem. Canada Post is less relevant now than it was, say, 5, 10, 15 years ago. So when a strike like this takes place, the idea is that you want there to be pressure for your employer to make a deal. And I don't feel like there's been that pressure. Canada Post releasing a statement that they feel like 10 million parcels have already been lost in that people have sent them using other couriers. I know, like, for instance, the Jersey seller that I use a lot for the stuff you see behind me, he just used a courier. He's like, well, Canada Post is on strike, so I'll use a courier. So that's it. It's and it's a mess too in that obviously when you go on strike, you want it to be at a time that's going to put the maximum amount of pressure on your employer. But where they didn't think this through, at least I this is how I'm seeing it. So the busiest time for mail delivery is Christmas, obviously, and Black Friday is huge. But if you go on strike now during the really busy time and people find alternatives to using your service, then the mail drops off after the Christmas break, and they usually lay people off anyways. So what's come out is that they've started laying off workers now because at this time where they're supposed to be really busy, they're not open. And I feel like at a time where Canada Post is losing a lot of money, this is the absolute worst possible time that they could have gone on strike. This is like, and I understand, again, I understand that this is a pressure point that the union saw, and you want to make sure that at the time you go on strike, it's when you're putting that pressure on your employer. But there's apathy. There's a lot of apathy from Canadians, other than for people who need government checks, who need something for medical reasons, things that are caught in the system that Canada Post is trying to get to these people. And so what ends up happening is for those people who don't get their government checks on time, or maybe they're a bit late, and I know we were gonna, who's getting checks? Old people. So you are taking the people who still use your service, who are probably going to be the older people in the crowd, and you're ticking them off, and they're not going to be as sympathetic to your cause. I did see like a statement from the union that Canada Post is trying to get the sympathies of Canadians and win the PR battle. They won the PR battle when they went on strike because I'm not saying Canada Post is negotiating in good faith. I'm not saying that Canada Post is a fantastic corporation that treats everybody fantastic. I'm not saying that, but it's the absolute worst possible time for them to go on strike. There are a lot of other options for people to ship packages with, and you just don't use Canada Post. So they're making it like easier for people now. So for people who are still using Canada Post all the time, now they're discovering other couriers. And I don't think it is unreasonable for Canada Post to say, look, if we're going to compete, we need to work 7 days a week. So they're going to need to hire more part time workers. And you're going to have evening work. You're going to have it run like a courier service if it's going to stay afloat. I don't think that striking from a job, when I saw reports earlier in the year that Canada Post could be insolvent by next year, and there's going to be an election in Canada, so you could just privatize mail delivery in Canada. You could do that, and that could absolutely happen, and then they could all end up out of work anyways. So it is a very difficult position that the union's in now because they're in this spot where Apparently, there's mediation that's fallen apart too. Talks have ground to a halt. They were close to some kind of a, not an agreement, but they were agreeing on a couple of items and just finding those little things like, okay, we can agree here. We'll come back to the big things. And now it just feels like um, they're both in this position of, all right, well, we'll talk to you later. We're not talking anymore. We're not responding. So Canada Post losing money. Now workers are getting laid off, and people are finding other options. So I know when I was reading articles on Canada Post and looking at the numbers and thinking to myself, how can they justify these costs? How can they justify operating at a loss like this? And for the union, who may have very valid reasons to strike right now, it's just such a bad time. It's a bad time for it, and you're giving the corporation an excuse to lay people off. You're giving the corporation an excuse to say, well, see, this business model doesn't work. Oh well. At some point in time, I would expect either back to work legislation from the government or some kind of forced mediation or something. Because obviously you can't have it shut down for months at a time because of some of the older people or people out in rural areas who just have Canada Post and don't have much else. So people out in remote locations who are vulnerable anyways are the ones that are suffering from this right now. And it's a bad setup all over. And so I wanted to do a video on it because I definitely have some opinions as somebody who was in a union, and you do talk about, if we went on strike at this point in time, that sure would show the boss, but you're also risking your job in the meantime. Because, like, again, the job I had was union, and you'd have busy days and slow days, and sometimes you have a really busy month. So if you're going to go on strike during that really busy month, great. But that next month is not so busy. So some of those part-timers are going to get laid off, and you're still losing that money in the meantime. Because even if you get strike pay, it's not the same pay that you make when you're working. So I don't know that there's a winner here, other than all the courier services, which have already been kind of eating their lunch. Uh, and just thinking about it, how often do I personally use Canada Post? I have a PO box that I use for the channel, um, but I don't really use Canada Post for mailing packages. Letter mail? What's letter mail? Everybody emails everything. So yeah, it's not a great situation Canada Post the company is in, and I don't think the union's in a great spot either, because you're already seeing people get laid off. They're just calling them. They're calling them, and they're apparently some have said, well, you can't lay us off. We're on strike, and the answer from the company is, you guys don't have any kind of contract with us. We absolutely can lay you off. So I don't think it's going to necessarily get better. I don't know what it's going to look like on the other side of this, but yeah, mail delivery in Canada definitely needs modernization, needs to be brought into, I'll say, the 20th century. I've seen people saying the 21st century. Yeah, the late 20th century I'd accept as well. It's been so backwards. There's nothing like showing up and going, it's 4:05 in the afternoon and they're closed already. So they open at 10 a.m. and they close at 4. This is stupid. When there's so many couriers that open at like 8 in the morning and they're open till like 8 at night. And so, yeah. And now I'm right on the news here. Talks suspended in Canada Post strike. If you're Canada Post, you can kind of wait them out. Honestly, you can wait them out now. Canada Post, I would imagine with the amount of money they've been losing, they're probably losing less money not having to pay for all of the day-to-day costs of Canada Post and just shutting it down than they would be losing if it was open and running at Christmas time. Because I know they make back some of what they lose during Christmas, but it's not a business model that works. And the business model has to change. And there you go. What was that? Anyways, cat chasing another cat in the house. Just another one of those days. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're Canadian and you're affected by this, let me know if you've been negatively impacted. There are a couple of packages that I'm waiting on that people that just use Canada Post have told me I only use Canada Post, so I'm not shipping that right now, which I find bewildering in this day and age because, I mean, everybody uses. I thought everybody's willing and able to use couriers. But let me know your thoughts. And this is the only video I'm going to do on this topic. I just felt like, I've got some thoughts on this. And I understand both sides of the argument. So I don't want to be a mediator. No. But I don't know what it's going to look like coming out the other side. But things have to change. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.